And Jai Jain, everyone. Welcome to our last and final session, and sharing with you the Jain path to Jain way of life. And today we will be talking about the Jain practices. So before we begin, what I will like to do is to just begin with our Namokara mantra, as we do. And what I'm going to ask is that we sit up in a comfortable position, and I'm going to ask Yogan Pai if, as he's joining in, and what we will do is to guide us through a simple Namokara mantra. In fact, we did a 24-hour Namokara mantra jap in Memphis, and so the Namokara mantra has been just going round and round in our minds as well. So Yogan Bhai, if you're ready, we'll start with the Namokara mantra, and then we'll begin. Absolutely. Okay, so please start.
Take a nice deep breath, folks. Inhale, big smile on our face. Hold, and slowly exhale. And let's say the Namokara mantra once together. Om Namo Ariyantam.
Om Namo Siddhanam. Om Namo Ayre. Om Namo Vachayana.
Om Namo Sasavanam. Eso Namakaru. Sarva Bhava Pranashna. Mangala Sarvesyam. Om Shanti. Great. All right. So we have great amounts of material to cover today, and I just want to make sure you can see my screen.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So we do our final journey in talking about practices. The most important thing about Jainism that we want to be able to do is be able to take our religion and bring it out into the day-to-day activity. So just think of this. We talked about the philosophy and the principles. They were the path. And then our practices are what the Jain way of life. Yogan Bhai, you've been working on this book and our team has been working on this for 2 decades almost. Maybe just a thought and sharing what has the response been? How has this resonated with people?
So people really appreciate, they understand the Jain philosophy at the core, but how do we practice in the day-to-day lives, especially in the North American context?
Yeah.
We had to experiment, define, and redefine. That's sort of the one view, because things were quite different here, of course. And now actually things are far easier. But the second part is we were not born with the user's manual. And being of an engineering background and so on, every product you create a user's manual. In fact, you created a user's manual first. So this became sort of a user's manual for a person, for a child, for an adult. And we don't always follow instructions. But nonetheless, it's good to document them. And that's how I've looked at this book, Jain Way of Life.
Absolutely. That's what many people have said, that the Jain Way of Life book has been a user's manual. And especially when people have come to age and their children have become teenagers, this has been a great product for us to talk about. Now, there was a survey done, and this actually leads to what we have been doing as well, which is we have been asking you to do all a self-reflection. And we'll take a minute and also look at Hiran Pokarna, Dr. Hiran Pokarna's perspective as well on this. But Yogan Bhai, take us when we asked people about their Jain way of life. What did many people have to say?
they said they're almost perfect people.
Mhm.
I'm just,
They said they were honest, not greedy, happy, forgiving, right?
yeah, they
Yeah.
they thought that they were perfect in many ways. As we dug deeper, of course they believed this, they responded to this, and
Sure.
we had 1,600 survey responses, so this was absolutely statistically significant. But as we dug deeper, right, are they happy? Okay, do they have strong control of their emotions? This is what we want to be able to do: peel the layer a little bit and look under the layers. And so
Yeah.
we may think we're all of this, but still there are a lot of parts to us that we could improve. Furthermore, we saw some shocking data in terms of majority of the Jains continue to use leather. Very few, I mean, 30% are vegans, partly,
Right.
and majority of them are open to marrying, the ones who are not married, to non-Jain Indian, as long as they're vegetarian. So
Yeah.
all of this tells me that the propagation of our Jain core beliefs and so on may not be as strong, especially with the next generation. And this is, I know this is not about that, but we have to be careful how we should strengthen the Jain core of our own, our people. So even in mixed marriages, we can continue living a Jain way of life. Sorry, didn't want me to go on that.
So absolutely. So I want to bring in Dr. Hiran Pokarna, and we had talked about his journey and how he and filling out the sheet. So maybe Hiran, if you're on, share with us what it was like in doing the Jain Path journey, and I'm going to just put that up as well.
Yeah, so I thought that the exercise was pretty self-reflecting,
Good.
and felt that it was definitely helpful to me when, sometimes these things, but when the question is asked and when you are trying to be true to yourself, it does help you at least think about a perspective and gives you a moment to reflect and see and decide where do you want your life to go, in what direction.
Yeah.
So I was happy that way, and that's why obviously I'm very happy to share what I wrote. Of course, some things are obviously personally about me, but we can go through it.
Sure.
And others can reflect and see where they stand.
Sure. And so as a reflective exercise, this is a tool that we can share with our friends, family, and others. I think that's what the point is. And if it helps us be better people, that's what's really important. And then there's a whole element of happiness that was there. Do you think that this was helpful and reflective as well, where you could say where you are and at present how happy you are relating to your health and affection and security, and that element was useful to you? You may be on mute.
Yes, for sure. Very, very helpful, because again, I know a lot of these things about myself, but when you put it on paper, you give yourself a moment to actually sit and see how you want to
Yeah.
change your lifestyle to get to a better score.
Yeah. And then, which is going to be our conversation today, it is about practices. We are Jains defined by what we do, not by our names and not by our family's background. And how we want to prioritize. I see that you took time and found that a priority for you doing yoga and exercise, doing meditation, mindfulness, balancing needs and wants, that these were some of the priorities that you seek as you begin to transform yourself. And was that level of exercise something that over the next 3 to 6 months you could try to strive for?
Absolutely, yeah. So this gives me a perspective and some aim to work on.
Right. And that's the point of doing all of this is once we can begin to share in a sometimes in a written down manner or a quantitative way how we can do that. Okay. Thank you so much, Hiran, for sharing that. And we would highly encourage others to do it, and then also get the friends and family to do it as well. So our conversation today is going to take us into the depths of the practices. We have talked about the philosophy. We have talked about the triple A's, the four philosophical theories: life, soul, karma, and moksha. Yogen Bhai, we talked about the three guiding principles, the triple A's. आज अपन Jain practices के बारे में बातें करेंगे. And we worked on this idea for years in trying to figure out what would be the best way to put the many practices that were in the Tattva Sutra into a common framework. We tried 3 practices, 10 practices, 12 practices. At the end, we really felt 24 practices was the best way to define our religion and what and who we are. And so we will begin with practices that relate to ahimsa. Then we will talk about practices that relate to anekantvad, and then we'll talk about practices that relate to aparigraha. So Yogen Bhai, yes.
Manish Bhai, I wanted to reflect on this a little bit, because I've been thinking, 24 practices seems like a lot and so on. But remember, we have so many dimensions to us, toward our life, to our body, to our mind, to our spirituality, to our relationship. There are so many dimensions to us. And trying to narrow down to 1 or 2 or 3 practices may not be possible, and we may not do service. And so please, when you do look at all these practices, you will see that they're pretty orthogonal.
Okay, so before I go into this, maybe let me ask others, because this is conversational. And again, a lot of the material that you'll be seeing here, you already have in your back of your mind, but we will put it in a structure that will hopefully fit together at the end or during the conversation. So Bipin Bhai, I'll ask you, and then Suneet, I'll go to you as well. Bipin Bhai, if we talk about being a Jain, for you, what does it mean? What practices define you as being a Jain? What part of you that you do means that you're a person of a Jain background?
Thank you, Manoj Bhai. I would say that what defines me as Jain, as someone who truly believes in ahimsa in terms of our eating habits.
Okay, so vegetarian, vegan diet.
Yes, vegetarian diet. In terms of not harming other insects when we walk out in the garden, be
Very
aware
nice.
when you go for a walk that there are insects there, and you try to avoid. At home, if you cannot practice completely ahimsa, we sometimes spray things for bugs and things of that sort, but you try to minimize that kind of violence. That becomes an good thing. And also try to control your anger so that you are not harming other people's emotions.
Absolutely.
That becomes a big part of being Jain.
Got it. So we'll stick with those, and we will talk about that in the various practices. Anyone else would like to share how the practices, again, that helps them define that they are Jains?
So Manoj Bhai,
Ji.
I feel that apart from, like, of course, ahimsa is our most important principle as a Jain. Yeah. And I feel that anekantvad should be our next this for
major
the peace and for the peace and harmony and understanding everybody's viewpoint and respecting viewpoint. So I feel that is also as important as
absolutely. And we'll talk about the practices that Anekantvad gives us, such as open-mindedness and stuff, and how do those come from. Other people want to talk about other practices that they do or they wish they would do. Yeah, Suneet, please.
Yeah, I like this picture because it's really putting the 3 A's that are the principles into practice. What I would love to see in the top is, I often talk about the acronym with my kids, the AGED, right? It's just a nice, easy thing to remember. That's how you practice it, controlling your anger, greed, ego, and deceit. I think you've got some aspects of that here, but that acronym, along with the 3 A's, is also very powerful. And I think, one time I remember talking to Shrita Pragyaji, he gave me a really good perspective because I was feeling bad. For example, in all of these practices, if you're not 100% there, you're still on a journey. Like the example I gave him, I said, look, I forced myself to get a car without leather, but I'm sure I still have some leather in the house, whether it's a belt or whether it's a shoe. And he made it very practical. He said, think of a scale of 1 to 10. Everybody's on a journey. You may not be like a sadhu who's a 10. You may be a 4 in something. You may be a 5 in eating. You may be somewhere else, but that's all good. Everybody's on a journey. Be happy with where you're at, and continue to strive to get to, a higher level, which you might get to in your next life. So it was a very good practical perspective to make people, be happy and comfortable with what they've been able to achieve, and continue to get better.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the many practices, and we'll go in with some of them. We'll go in depth, but this is really about putting it into categories. We've talked about nonviolence. Ahimsa is the principle. What are the practices that come from ahimsa? When we look at, there are practices relating that are relating to the others, such as not killing animals, forgiving, compassion, and service. Then there are practicing that are relating to our own selves, such as exercising, being careful in our speech, not harming our bodies, and stress-free. Let's go into each one into more detail. So what I would say is, Yogen Bhai, when we talk about ahimsa, we talk about the practices. First, think about our ahimsa practices towards others. And these are the 4 practices that relate to others. And then these are other 4 practices that are relating to the self. Any thoughts and comments on that before we go into each of the practice and then go into more depth?
I think it helps us understand by categorizing like this for others versus ourselves. Otherwise, this whole ahimsa can become so narrow that we're unable to really break it down. It's a very complex subject, as you can all imagine.
Okay. So for everyone, I'm going to take a minute or two because we are going to see 24 slides, which are in this format. And this is really for reference as well. So the practice is a vegetarian diet. It comes from non-violence. Ahimsa is the principle, a little logo, and the color blue, which is for the ahimsa color. Then we talk about the meaning of that, which means less violence if we partake in fruits and vegetables, and also understanding a vegan diet, which is not harming through procurement of milk. Then we talk about scriptures, where there are many places that vegetarian and vegan diet or vegetarian more so than is talked about, and we share the exact scriptures. And then this is unique. That is, where does it land in science and business world? Where do these things are relevant to our lives today is important to keep in mind. So this is the construct by which we're going to be talking about the various practices, and then categories of practices are there. And we may at the end not have a practice that you should think that you may be thinking that we should, or we may have been a bit redundant on some of the practices as well. But any questions or comments on the general structure of the practice in Jainism? Does this kind of structure help that you can see where in the scriptures, where in science, and the meaning? Okay. All right. So let's talk about the 4 practices that relate to others from ahimsa. First was, one was vegetarian, not harming. Second is forgiveness. And really talk about forgiveness, as a simple symbol is that we have to be talking about, and we know this well, asking for forgiveness, and then the other part is giving forgiveness. Our scriptures are very, very clear on this in Tattva Sutra 7.6, 7.11, that forgiveness, forgive all creatures, I cultivate friendliness with all, I harbor resentment against none. And we know that from science that there is very clear evidence that anger is what ignites. So Yogan Bhai, you and I have talked about this whole concept of the damage that anger does. Share your thoughts on this.
So yeah. we know that we know that there's huge amount of stress that happens, and stress is the #1 cause of major diseases. And here what we've done is just taken a little bit more energy to say how exactly our brain changes, our cardiovascular, immune, digestive system changes through anger.
Sure. Now, we may say that, look, I'm of the Jain faith, it really doesn't matter to me. I believe in it, forgiveness, because my religion tells me. But you know, you and I can think that way, but our kids may not think that way. And people, our colleagues may not think that way. What is really important is to put and lay out in very clear terms the practices which are going to benefit us and how they're going to benefit us. I'll talk a little bit about anger. So Arun Gandhi, share a story. The grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, close friend, and he was in Memphis and he came back for a visit, and we were chatting, and he told me something really interesting. 80% of the violence that we see is coming from individuals who harbor anger. It's coming out of their anger, of 80% of the violence. Imagine if we could help even a small percentage of individuals understand through forgiveness, the practice of forgiveness, that anger. The third practice that relates to for others from ahimsa is compassion. Compassion is really something that is a continuum. At one level, you could be looking at someone and pity them. Then you could have sympathy for them. You could have empathy, which is you feel their pain. Sympathy is when you just feel sorry. Pity is when you just see them there in that terrible position. Compassion is a step beyond all that, where you say, I want to alleviate their suffering. Bhagwan Mahavir talked about that very clearly in the scriptures on how what the importance of compassion was. And when we look at compassion in healthcare, in other areas, we know that it boosts our happiness, it improves our well-being. These are psychological studies that have been done. And then the last of the practice in Jain tradition that comes from ahimsa that is relating to others is service. In fact,
and we know that,
yeah,
and we know that Jains, of course, do a lot of service, but we don't have that as focused as a lot of the other religions, and sometimes we are far behind on that. But absolutely, it's not because it's not in the scriptures. It is a very important part of our scriptures.
It's very important. And this is my favorite quote from the scriptures, 5.21, Parasparo Guru Jivanam, souls render services to one another. Now, services can be done for money or for gain. That's okay also. But the greatest service is when we do it without the expectations. And we know that when those individuals who provide service, it improves their mood, the blood pressure, it improves the good hormones that are there that will help them as well. So what we did very briefly is talk about ahimsa, that principle, the first of the AAAs, nonviolence towards others, and what practices are there. Maybe I want to pause there before we get and talk about the other practices of nonviolence towards the self. But any thoughts and comments as we begin to talk about practices? And there are lots of practices, but putting our religion into these 24 practices that we can teach our children, and when they do something, when they want to do something, how to do that. Veena, go ahead. Yeah.
I think it should be other way around. We have to have first non-violence towards ourselves, because unless we achieve, how can we do something
That's
with
true.
others? Because everything comes from within. So we have to be, and I think it's the reflection, as you said, it's a reflection, what goes inside us, we throw out. So I think we have to forgive ourselves first for anything. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, perfect.
So I feel like it should be in, and even I think the Jain talks about helping ourselves first, then only even Muni Maharaj and all, they study, they live their life, they follow, and then they start teaching. So
right. So I will say this,
Veena,
you're right.
Very nicely put. In fact, we were thinking, yes, we should probably move the sequence.
That we should talk about nonviolence towards the self, and then talk about nonviolence towards others.
Very good. Very good.
That's a very good point. Yep, good. I think Aruna also has a point. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I agree with Veena ji, and one of the points I wanted to make was on those lines that nonviolence has to be towards yourself first, and then towards others. Somehow I feel nonviolence to others has an inherent ego that goes along with it, and I don't think that is in line completely with what I understand of the principles. So for me, non-violence to self, compassion towards self, is what will automatically lead to activities, services towards others. The other part I did want to comment on was anger. I think, yes, we understand the impact of anger, but some introspection around why the anger arises even is what will lead us to not get angry or even, forgive. And to me, anger is always because some need is not being met.
Yeah,
and if we understand, if we understand what those needs are and which need of ours is not met, the anger will dissolve, forgiveness will come.
Right. So very well said. And actually, each one of these practices, in both in the scriptures and in our other learnings in society, as psychological learnings, now is the ability we're actually able to mix in what psychology is telling us, what research evidence is telling us on behavior, right? Anger comes from a sense of insecurity. Insecurity occurs because maybe in our younger years, when we were growing up, we did not get the caring, the love from others. Maybe we were in an environment that wasn't very secure, stable, right? All of those are driving principles and depths that we can go to. But here is a great forum to have those conversations on each one of those. And for the sake of time, I want to move through the other conversation of the other principles. Now let's talk about nonviolence towards self.
Manoj, we have 20 more of these to go through. So just for everybody's background, our goal is not to go deep into any of these, but to lay out a sort of a model or a structure, right? And we would love for you, as we're going through this, to tell us, do these make sense or not? Are these important enough to be one of 24? Should we reword any of this? Any kind of feedback would be most appreciated.
Yeah. So a logo to tell us about this practice of yoga exercise as well. Again, exercising is keeping our bodies healthy. Our scriptures actually want us to do this. It is connecting the soul, and it is the act of yoga, which literally means linking the body and the soul together. And we know that exercise and yoga have multiple health benefits, all the way from reducing anxiety, depression, to better self-care, and so forth. So exercise, yoga as a practice. Carefulness. Bipin Bhai, you talked about how being careful in what we do with little insects, but also what we speak, and even what we think. This whole idea of samitis and guptis are really important of carefulness. And this actually comes from not from the health perspective, but if you are in a business environment, and even as a physician, I am talking to individuals, you have to think before you speak, so as you don't offend others by mistake. You have to think before you act. Good workplace behavior. These values are really beneficial in our day-to-day lives.
And
other
unfortunately, Manoj, hardwired to be careful. We have to make, in the old days, we had to make decisions fast. Is it an enemy or is it a friend? And therefore, we have to unlearn that and be careful. And that's very important.
Absolutely. So other is the intoxication free. Now, actually, the funny thing is, some of these things were not even shown by science to be harmful. Let's take smoking. If you remember, President Reagan, before he became president, when he was an actor, advertised for cigarettes. Science, the medical arena, did not say cigarettes could cause harm or could be harmful. Alcohol has always been something which stupefies the mind. Our scriptures have said that that is not something that is encouraged, as are drugs and all that. We know that avoiding smoking prevents cancer, heart disease, drugs prevents overdose. And so these are other practices for not harming the self. And then this is something that we felt was very important to put in context. And I want to maybe take a minute here and reflect on what people think. If there is the single most important harmful set of activities that we as Jains, and I am part of it, do, we can be vegetarian, we can be careful about things, but bringing in stress into our lives, into the lives of our family members, into the lives of our colleagues that we work. And our scriptures are very clear that one must maintain one's composure in favorable and unfavorable conditions. Shamta bhav. We know stress is physical, mental, emotional. We know that it comes from overwork, self-criticism, many things, and that it has benefits. So that, in short, are all the practices that are related to ahimsa. Ahimsa, non-violence, gives us those many practices. People's thoughts, comments, or questions? Yeah. And I'm going to go up back to the logo. But
I think it's just important to remind ourselves that the stress practice or reducing stress, all the other ones help us and can help us reduce stress. Just by saying I'm going to reduce stress will not reduce the stress. But all these have to be worked in concert to make a difference and to make an impact.
Now, if we, for a moment, we forget why we are talking all of this, again, it is to achieve a level of happiness. When we talk about happiness, we are talking about equanimity. We're talking about a path to moksha. If we're on the ascetic path, if we are a monk, that's the path. But for us in our day-to-day lives, these are the practices which will help us achieve happiness according to our religion in the principle of ahimsa. Any thoughts or comments on ahimsa? And then we want to go into anekantvad and then aparigraha.
Yeah, I think just as we talked about how to practice this, about the stress-free, because just thinking that I want to live a stress-free life is not going to happen. I feel whenever I start writing into my journal and practice gratitude, things starts becoming easier, because then a parigraha concept kind of I follow in practice. Okay, I have enough, all the good things that takes my stress down. Automatically, I'm in a equanimity state. So that's something.
So you actually led into the perfect conversation, which is practices that come from anekantvad and practices that come from anekantvad in relation to our mind. Those practices we will talk about shortly. They are in our thoughts, those anekantvad which are in our speech, and those that are in our action. So open-mindedness, meditation, respect and gratitude, humility, straightforwardness, scriptures, equity, prayer and puja and rituals, those come in our actions as well. I know there's a lot of material, but again, this is just helping us categorize. This is the big picture. Don't need to go into the depths and details. Keep in mind anekantvad, that's the color for anekantvad, open-mindedness, right? Non-absolutism, probably the single most important thing. I think Preeti, when you talked about this, we need to be non-absolutist in our perspective. And actually, this is a concept that many people still sometimes don't even agree with. They think that being fundamentalist or being absolutely adamant about their perspective and not respecting others is the way to go. So receptive to others' ideas, you don't have to agree. Very important, do not have to agree. And Jain Tattva Sutra says this very clearly. I can't imagine any other thought process which is novel to Jainism, that is that absolute existence or absolute non-existence, absolute permanence, absolute non-permanence, and defends non-absolutism. Those don't exist.
We Jains are so convinced that Jainism is the only path. You know, we've talked to so many people, and even the thought of like, well, you know, what about the other point of views and so on? Jainism is the only path.
Right. So that's why being open to other religions is really important. Now, what is important to know is that this is open-mindedness is the way the business world and day-to-day world is going. It helps you gain insight. If you look at a board of a company, corporation, and others, they have people from diverse backgrounds. They have men, they have women, they have old folks, and they have young folks. Why? Because that is what is beneficial overall. As an individual, open-mindedness will help us gain new experience, learn new things, and be optimistic. And this is a funny slide, but I think it's important to share with us because we are talking about religion, and that we ourselves have to be open-minded about what we believe. Do you believe your religion is the only path? And you can see people, I am so happy to know that of all the different religions, I was raised in the only one that holds the real truth. And yes, we often go into this tunnel where we believe and we're only one-minded in that belief. Let us spend a few minutes going also into the depths of other practices that relate to anekantvad. you have the practice of meditation and mindfulness. Now, this is critically important. If I would have to say that what does meditation and mindfulness do is that allows that power that each and every time we need is self-reflection and self-awareness.
But you've actually taught this course at CTC, right?
Yeah.
On mindfulness.
So a couple of years ago, the Centers for Disease Control for the HR group invited us, and we had 200 people who went through a course with us for about 6 weeks, in which we went through an entire process of mindfulness and its benefit. What's amazing is our tradition and religion talks about these in very clear ways. Science has shown the benefits, and there are different types of meditation, and each one has a different impact on our brain. We know that through EEG, there's a focused attention, such as just concentrating on a mantra. There's open monitoring, almost like mindfulness, just looking at and visualizing and seeing our thoughts. There is self-transcendence, just allowing the thoughts to go away. And we've done a book, a small booklet on this as well. Again, practices that are coming from our Anekantvad, respect, and then we talked about gratitude. Our religion really talks a great deal about that. Anekantvad relates to how relationships should be made, which is with respect to others' views. Taking that whole idea of respect, Sutra 9.20 is very clear. I know this is a lot of detail, but it helps it helps you realize that what we're talking about is directly coming from the sutras. Reverence means due respect for learning. What are we having reverence for? It is the learning, enlightened worldview, samyak darshan, good conduct, senior ascetics. So
Manoj, in fact, the Morkram mantra is a prayer of gratitude. We are thankful.
Exactly.
Right? We would like to be like the Arihantas and Siddhas.
Absolutely. And then the science benefits again, keeping suicidal thoughts at bay. We know that those are increasing self-esteem are very beneficial. And we know, again, from science, things such as respect and gratitude, our chemicals, the brain chemicals change. These are all the references that bring in to that, improving sleep, improving our resilience is important. The next practice is that of humility, humbleness. Anekantvad is something that helps us see beyond ourselves. We come in often into a meeting saying, this is my view. And then what we need to be thinking from the principle of Anekantvad, that this is not about me. It is more about us. It is about a broader perspective. And humility is where we take our ego and realize that it is not greater than others' ego. And again, so beautifully said in the Das Dharmas, forgiveness, Uttam Shama, Madhav, Arjav, and all of those that we talked about. And humbleness is what works when you're trying to build a team, getting people to work with you. Straightforwardness, not being deceitful, incredibly important principle as well in today's world. Withholding information in our workplace, things that can be harmful in ways as well. So these are things that principles that even thousands of years ago that were talked about. People appreciate you when you're straightforward, shows that you're caring as well. So those were the principles that related to our thoughts. Those are nonviolent. Those are related to speech. And we'll finish with Anekantvad and talk about those that relate to our practices. So practice of the scriptures and spiritual reading, very clearly in the scriptures talks about that. And I was quite involved in religion and science. And what was very clear from the evidence is those who were religious, who read the Bible, who were practicing church-going practices, they had less stress, lower blood pressure, and lived longer even. So we know that there's health benefits to that, the practice as well. And then
as well as encouraging ourselves to not only read Jain scriptures, but sometimes reading non-Jain books, spiritual books, can give us a strong insight. For example, there's a book called Conversations with God. I think 3 or 4 volumes. And personally, for me, that helped me in a huge way in understanding Jainism better. Yeah. So looking at other perspective helps understand our perspective.
And then finishing up on Anekantvad, equity, right? We talked about the equality and equity, that we have justice and fairness in this principle. And I look at this each time I am looking at a patient or I'm looking at others, my colleagues, not to stereotype, not to bias. This is where it's coming from Jain tradition. And then there are ways we can talk about our societies going towards religious equality by having a democracy that allows everyone to practice their religion. Yes, not everyone is of that mindset, but there's gender equality, racial equality, income equality, and others that will soon follow. And lastly, the practice of prayer, puja rituals. Again, Anekantvad says that there are multiple paths towards spirituality as well. We can't think that meditation is the only path. Can't think that scripture reading is the only path. Bhakti is another path as well. And it sort of moves us. And that practice is there. So take a moment and ask if any questions and comments, and then we go into aparigraha and the 8 practices that come from aparigraha. Any thoughts, comments? Bipin Bhai, lots of material. And as we finish up on the practices with aparigraha. Any thoughts?
Yes, I have a question, Manoj Bhai.
Ji.
Absolutist Jains believe that only way to attain moksha is through Jain path. And that is also pretty rough. Most of us do not follow all the things that a real religious Jain should follow. So my question is, if we consider Anekantvad, there are 7 billion people in this world. Jains make hardly 0.1% of that. And out of those, very few would have daily practice of reaching moksha. So there has to be non-Jains would also should be achieving moksha, but the lot of conservative Jains don't believe that.
Yeah.
How do we resolve this?
I think it's how we interpret. Very good question. And I think this is how we interpret what is in the scriptures for ourselves. And everyone is, again, open to their interpretation. I am of not that belief that you have to be an absolute Jain as written in the scriptures. And rather, I am of the belief that Anekantvad allows us the liberty to look at our scriptures in a context where it is the most beneficial in our journey towards moksha and spirituality. So I'll say it depends, and it varies on people's perspective and how they take it. But I do not take our scriptures as an absolutist perspective. I take them more as guiding perspective.
Okay.
So I think that's
remember, like these scriptures have been written over time. We know that almost scriptures of all the other religions have been written over time and have been modified and modified and modified. But it's really hard to claim that our path is the only path and the true path, and no other people besides the Jains who've gone through the harshest of penances in life can achieve moksha. So maybe even the definition of moksha is we have to redefine in some of these cases. But there are two hands that are raised, Manoj.
Yeah, please, let's go ahead and we have time, and we're glad to entertain conversation here. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Suneet.
Yeah, just real quick on the previous slide. I think we talked about like equity, equality, and those kinds of things. And nowadays in the corporate world, they're going even beyond that, because you can see, I love that picture because it shows, okay, on the left, they all have equal stands. On the right, it's a little more customized to individual needs. But the real, even to go one step beyond that, is to remove the barrier altogether. There shouldn't even be a fence, right? So in the corporate world, they talk about inclusion and belonging.
Yeah.
So it may be good to include that as the next evolution of this.
Absolutely. Just, yep, removing the fence. Yes, very good. And someone else had a comment.
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Well, I was just going back. I think in the transition, we lost the meaning. I think the meaning was follow one path. It could be Jainism, it could be Buddhism, it could be, because if you follow one path, you will lead or you will end up somewhere. But if you keep changing the path, then you will be just lost. And you may find a path, but I think that's what it was meant to be. Okay, Jainism is the way, or I think they meant to say just follow one rather than going to 5 different places. But now,
yeah.
And I think now people think, okay, this is the only path. I think then everybody says ours is the only path. But I think for me, it feels like, okay, follow one path. So you will go to you will end up going somewhere.
Sure. Great. I want to finish up on the aparigraha practices. Now, this by far are some of the hardest ones. And the aparigraha practices relate to non-possessiveness, which aparigraha to the mind, to the body, and to social causes. So those that are relating to the mind, how do we balance our day-to-day needs and wants? Yogan Bhai, you went and got a new iPhone the other day. Did you really need it? Or were you really wanting it? I know.
If I show you my iPhone and how broken it is, I've been wanting it, but I needed both. But listen, folks, it's the thought that you have and how obsessed you're with that thought and how you feel about it when you have it, and so it's not only you can have all the things you want, but the way you treat it, the way you feel about it, the way you
and there
manage
it.
it.
You don't have to become defensive on this matter. That's okay. but what we're saying is it varies. And what's really important is that we got to be reflective on this, right? And it relates to the mind. Then there are some aparigraha practices like fasting that relate to, and penance that relate to the body and sensual desires as well. Obviously, all of us will die, and then there is other aparigraha practices that we can do charity, and we have to care for the environment. Again, derived all from Jainism. Let's see where they're derived from and what are the scientific benefits. Absolutely, not a problem. Balancing needs and wants. We really need to be thinking about what are our wants, because that will help distinguish on what we should be stressing about. Our religion talks very clearly about that in 9.26 Atat Sutra. And we know that greed creates internal conflict. This may be helpful. We've got to be thinking what are our basic needs: food, water, and maybe our necessities, okay, a phone, okay, our wants, maybe a new iPhone. A greed is maybe a new iPhone every 3 or 6 months or the minute it comes out. Don't know. But yes, it's there. It's there. Other way of looking at another practice is contentment. This is really important. I think jealousy, enviness is something, being envious is something that is deep down within all of us. We compare. The minute we hear someone else received something that we didn't, may it be a material, may it be praise, that calmness of mind is something there. We talked about the whole idea of detachment. Yes, that comes in, and expectations. Those are the philosophical construct of this. Why we're not talking about that is because we're really talking about practices. And it goes all the way in our dharmas, the 10 dharmas as well. And then there's scientific benefit. We know very well fasting, different types of fasting. This is a practice done tremendously by all of us. And it helps us, it's in the scriptures and helps us scientifically as well. Penance, controlling our senses. It rewires. The very fact that you begin to do a penance, that you control your senses, it rewires your thinking. It rewires the way we practice as well. Managing our sensual desires, our excessive desires as well. That's all part and parcel of who we are, and having a healthy and balanced life and strong relationships.
Manoj, I just wanted to share, in the last 3 of these practices, the role of taking a vow plays a very strong, is a very good way to have these practices, be able to manage them. And we should, at some other time, think about the power of taking a vow.
Absolutely. And as we finish up, the practice of art of dying, and in our scriptures, very much so, the whole idea of getting ready for death. And in palliative care and hospice care now, that is part and parcel of what we do each and every day as doctors as well, the practice of dying. And then what aparigraha relates to the community, charity. Charity makes a huge difference in our lives. Just think of it from the selfish reason. Those who give, in fact, are much better off than those who are not giving for their own health and wellness. And we bring more equity into the world in that way. And then caring for our environment as well. Reversing climate change, which we could not have imagined would be happening at that speed. And Bhagwan Mahavir actually talked about this. There was a whole conference on ecology and Jainism at Harvard a decade ago, and it still reflects on those principles. So finish with this. We have spent time in thinking and talking about theory of life, soul, karma, moksha. There is philosophy. Philosophy leads to the principles. Principles are leading to the 24 practices, 4 philosophical constructs, 3 AAAs, and 24 Jain practices, driven by Samyak Darshan, Samyak Gyan, Samyak Charit, Jain way of life, talking, achieving happiness, equanimity in our day-to-day lives. This is what day-to-day joy, happiness is what we're talking about. Lasting happiness, eternal happiness is moksha. This is a summary in brief of what Jainism is telling each and every one of us. We can choose what we like. We can choose the path that works for us. But this is a path that, especially those in North America, and especially our children and our children's children will benefit from. So I'll pause with that. Any thoughts and comments?
Manoj, we can have people stay back if they want to give feedback. That's fine, but let's at least, we can do the Namaskar mantra and with that, and then people can stay back.
And then we can stay back and just have some conversation. So yes, please,
sure.
Why don't you close us with a Namaskar mantra, and then
A big smile, folks. Take a nice deep breath. Inhale. And exhale. Namo Ariyantanam, Namo Siddhanam,
Namo Satanam,
Namo
Namo
Ariyanam,
Namo
Namo
Vachayanam,
Vachayam,
Namo Louisa Savanam,
Esu
Supanchanamo Kalu,
Sarva
Sarva
Pava
Pava Pranashna,
Mangalana
Mangalana
Sarvesa,
Sarvasam, Paramam,
Om
Om
Shanti.
Shanti.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was our pilot presentation. We were learning each step of the way. So thank you so much for taking time and feedback. Mayur, we didn't get to hear from you today, but I would be delighted to hear your feedback and others' feedback and how we can make this better, different. We're going to be modifying it for more presentations. But Mayur, your thoughts?
I kudos to the entire team to sort of take the concepts and simplifying it, and taking each section and making it practical for everyone. So my only thought is, whenever you have the on the different slides where you have the meaning and the scripture reference and the benefits, some of these concepts are definitely a lot more easier to apply than some others. So for example, vegetarianism, you know what it is, but I would probably maybe add one more column for either resources or references or examples. So that way, if you wanted to be more
relatable,
or someone that you can emulate towards,
yeah,
that
that's
is
a great
current.
idea.
So I think that would sort of give it's almost a catalyst to sort of moving in that direction. Because right now this is again theoretical, and this is more doing.
I like that. I think having, and actually I was contemplating that also on how to put an example in, and I think creating a category of an example of something. So imagine if you had something that related to vegetarianism or veganism, and then talk about individuals who took that lifestyle, or for anger, talk about individuals.
Or even hyperlinks to sort of move, because a lot of the things, and also the most a very important thing that I was when you were going through this is also the sense of community. When you have YJA or Jain conventions or some of the other events that are there, that's where you get a lot of tons of ideas. It's like, hey, I'm doing this, but it's like, wow, this person is really hitting it out of the park. So it's very, very good, but great job.
I like that. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Other comments and thoughts?
This is Bipin Shah.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you, are you planning to share copies of your slides?
Absolutely. We will send you same email and stuff, the 4 sets of slides. They're actually readily available also, and they will be on the 2 websites, JWAL, jainwayoflife.org, so, and jainpath.org. And I would say both the books, the Jain Way of Life book as well as the Jain Path book. So each slide has about a page worth of depth in it, explanation and all. And that's if you go even now on Jain Way of jainpath.org, you'll be able to find that over there. So yes, we will do that. Yep, absolutely. Other questions or comments?
Manojji, this is Sujal here. This was really a very, very great and insightful experience. This is the first time I'm going through, such workshop, I would say, because yeah, there were some, assignments and like practices, how to really reflect, self-reflecting ones. I really want to add to what Mayurji said. It really makes sense, or maybe it make a little more difference when it actually comes to apply in a daily life. Like the elephant story, for example, because that is so profound and so it's a great example why we understand Anikantwad so easily now. Something like that, if we can have some kind of, or maybe just one situation where one person says this, and we can think this way, or we can talk this way, or we can comment this way, so that that person doesn't really hurt or things like that. So that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we are all looking for ways how we can practice this in our day-to-day lives. And I will share with you again. I'm going to share my screen for a minute, and this is, if you can see, this is the website, the Jain Way of Life, JWOL, and Jain Path also, and you can click, and this will give you the Jain Way of Life book, and lots of the examples and lots of the things that we've talked about are in this as well, and likewise in the Jain Path as well. Lots of details on what each of these practice is and what it means and so forth, and depth as well. So yep, absolutely. But you're right, in our conversations, we definitely need to add more examples. Good. Other comments and questions? So great. If not, Jain and everyone, thank you so much. We are very, very grateful for your time and input. We will, and please ask your center and others to join as well when we do these in the upcoming months. Jain, take care.